But Starmer, of course, will do nothing about it. And his second speech in Parliament as Prime Minister, where he declared his love for the European Court of Human Rights and its convention. His leadership, frankly, is dismal. It is uninspiring. It is disconnected from real life. It is, in my view, unpatriotic. And now, even opinion polling today suggesting that over half the country thinks his leadership, frankly, is.
That was Nigel Farage pulling the mask off completely. He exposed what many have suspected, that Keir Starmer stands behind a foreign court that's blocked deportations, shielded offenders, and effectively tied Britain's hands on border control. Farage didn't mince his words. This, he said, isn't leadership, it's submission to external powers. And the public, he argued, can see it clearly. This wasn't mere criticism, it felt more like a political dismantling, precise, brutal, and potentially career-defining. Farage's remarks were laced with lines that could follow Starmer for years to come. But what else did he reveal? Let's break it down.
But today I wanted to talk a bit more, really, about the Labour Party. Now, they, of course, right now are absolutely terrified of reform. And if you think the Conservatives had a bad day on May the 1st, arguably, Labour did even worse. We completely wiped them out in County Durham, in many other parts of the East Midlands and elsewhere. And now, I have to say, they've decided they'll turn their guns on me. And every PMQs now, we see an obscure backbench Labour MP get up and ask the Prime Minister a question. Is it true that the honourable member from Clacton is a complete rotter? To which the PM says, oh, well, of course he, supports Putin and wants to abolish the NHS. And I have to sit there, and I've got no means of actually answering back or fighting back in any way at all. I think even without reform, this government is off to the worst start of any government since Eden and the Suez Crisis in 1956. They are collapsing in terms of support. Their response to us is just to turn on the Labour lie machine.
Labour is in full-scale damage control, and Nigel Farage's latest remarks made one thing crystal clear. The party is no longer fighting reform on ideas or policy. Instead, it's resorting to personal attacks, pre-scripted smears, and hollow theatrics inside Parliament. And who's leading this counter-offensive? Not Keir Starmer. He's conspicuously absent. Instead, he deploys backbenchers armed with talking points, safe in the knowledge that Farage can't answer back from the public gallery. That isn't leadership, it's evasion wrapped in parliamentary privilege. Let's be blunt. Labour suffered a political humiliation. In County Durham and across large stretches of the East Midlands, once rock-solid Labour territory, reform didn't just make inroads, they demolished the Red Wall. Starmer knows it. But instead of rethinking strategy, Labour's response has been to unleash its media machine against a single man. Why? Because they have no coherent answer to a movement powered by working-class disillusionment. What we're seeing isn't confidence, it's fear, thinly disguised as moral superiority. Labour isn't attacking Farage because he's wrong. They're attacking him because, right now, he's winning.
And I think today, perhaps it's just a little opportunity for me perhaps to answer some of that. Reform really are now the party of working people. One of the arguments I made in the run-up to May the 1st was that many of our voters are people with alarms that go off at 5 o'clock in the morning. They go off to work. They work damned hard. Whether they're working for companies, whether they're trade union members, whether they run their own businesses or act as sole traders. They're the people that are voting for us. And the great divide that is opening up in British society is between those that get up and go to work, pay an ever-increasing tax burden, feel ever more hampered by government at every level, and their next-door neighbours who choose to do nothing, but actually have a very similar standard of living. That is becoming increasingly a massive problem in this.
This strikes at one of the most sensitive and politically explosive truths in modern Britain. Farage has articulated what many politicians won't dare to say out loud. The country is drifting toward a two-tier society, not split by income, but by attitude toward work. On one side stand the people who keep Britain running, the lorry drivers up before dawn, the shopkeepers, the factory workers, the tradesmen. These are the men and women who form the nation's backbone. On the other side, Farage argues, are those who've grown dependent on a system that rewards inactivity and punishes effort, a system Labour seems increasingly comfortable defending. And here lies the accusation. Under Starmer, Labour has chosen the easier path, trading ambition for appeasement. Instead of earning trust through vision and integrity, they rely on dependency as a political currency. It's a moral failure that cuts to the heart of what the Labour Party once stood for. Reform's supporters, Farage insists, are not hard-right converts. They're disillusioned former Labour voters who feel betrayed. They've watched the party that once championed the working class transform into one sustained by state dependency and virtue signalling. These are the builders, drivers and doers of Britain, and they feel abandoned. Labour's silence on this widening divide speaks volumes, because acknowledging it would mean admitting the uncomfortable truth. The party that once stood for the working has become the party of the idle. And that's not progress, it's decline.
Country. But I also think that Labour have a problem with their personalities. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, I don't think I've ever seen anybody so hopelessly out of their depth at any point in my professional or political career. And the idea that we were going to get this 10-year Bank of England economist, and of course she was dubbed by my colleague Lee Anderson as Rachel from accounts, which actually wasn't accurate, because it's Rachel from complaints. She is doing the most awful job, and what she and the Prime Minister have done is to spread doom and gloom and despondency. Economics works on confidence. This lot haven't managed to instill any. And of course she's backed up by Jonathan Reynolds, ever affable, but not the qualified solicitor that he told everybody he was. This is a very low-grade government. And unless you have successful private business, employing people and paying taxes, you cannot have an effective, functioning society. And it is, to me, truly astonishing that of all the 25 men and women in the Cabinet, not a single one has ever set up or run a private business. We have a bunch of lawyers. We have a bunch of people prepared to bow down to this concept of international law, but without the economic competency to run a country. And that is why we are genuinely going in the wrong direction.
What Nigel Farage laid out cuts directly to the core of an uncomfortable truth the mainstream press rarely acknowledges, but it matters more than ever. Look closely at Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet. How many of them have actually built something from the ground up? How many have signed paychecks, met payroll deadlines, or risked their own capital in the private sector? The answer, as Farage points out, is none. Starmer's front bench is dominated by career politicians, think tank veterans, bureaucrats, and legal technocrats, individuals shaped entirely within the safety of the public sphere. Yet these are the people now asking to be trusted with the monumental task of rebuilding Britain's economy. Take Rachel Reeves, once introduced as a former Bank of England economist, a title that lent credibility. But critics now argue she lacks the practical experience required of a chancellor overseeing a nation in financial strain. Then there's Jonathan Reynolds, accused of misrepresenting his own professional background, a charge that goes beyond mere incompetence and flirts with deception. The pattern is clear. Starmer's team shares one defining trait, an aversion to risk. None of them has ever faced the possibility of personal financial loss or the reality of a business collapsing under their own decisions. They operate comfortably within the theoretical world of reports, white papers, and press releases detached from the pressures that drive real economic growth. Because growth doesn't come from committees. It comes from people who've lived the stakes. Entrepreneurs, employers, risk takers. And under Starmer's Labour, those people are conspicuously absent.
We are watching the de-industrialisation of Britain. Yes, of course, there are some jobs being created in wind and solar. But for every job created in that sector, there are 3 or 4 being lost in other parts of the British economy. We now have the most expensive energy prices commercially of any country in the world. And yet the net zero mania, and it isn't just Miliband, well, we know he's away with the fairies, but it's all of them are committed to this policy, just as the Conservative Party were when Boris Johnson and others led them before. I find it extraordinary also to witness the exodus. The exodus in London and in some other parts of the country is now in full flight. The number of people I know, and I'm talking about successful, hard-working, entrepreneurial people. I'm talking about people that have taken great risks in their lives, created a lot of jobs, and paid many millions, or in some cases, tens of millions in tax. They are leaving. And they're leaving our country at a very, very rapid rate. It's the biggest brain drain we've had since the 1970s, and yet no one seems to have woken.
Every time Labour celebrates its so-called Times Green Revolution asterisk, it carefully sidesteps the devastating consequences it's already unleashed. Shuttered steelworks, factories driven overseas, and logistics firms collapsing under the weight of record fuel prices. Yet the government presses on, clinging to an ideological dream that's quickly becoming an economic nightmare. Farage's warning is simple, and it's backed by cold reality. For every green job created through wind or solar investment, several more vanish across traditional industries. The result? Britain now bears the highest commercial energy costs anywhere in the developed world. That isn't just an alarming statistic, it's an existential threat to British manufacturing. And who's leaving as a result? Not the wealthy elites or the celebrity activists championing these policies from gated estates. It's the builders, the engineers, the inventors, the taxpayers who form the backbone of the economy. They're taking their skills, capital, and innovation abroad. What's unfolding isn't merely an energy or employment crisis. It's a modern-day Times brain drain, times a silent exodus of talent and enterprise. And while it happens, Keir Starmer remains preoccupied with earning applause from Greta Thunberg and the Davos elite, seemingly oblivious to the industries and people slipping through his fingers.
And then we come to the Prime Minister himself, and whilst I don't bear him any personal grudge, I don't think there's any malice in him at all, it's clear to me this man doesn't believe in anything. Now, it's quite extraordinary that for over a year it was obvious that Starmer would become our Prime Minister. You would have thought there was a plan. You would have thought there was a passion for what they would do in government as opposed to achieving the position of being in government. And yet, as he stood outside 10 Downing Street mid-morning on July the 5th to give his acceptance and victory speech, in the 9 minutes for which he spoke, he referred to his notes 158 times. Once every 2 seconds, the new Prime Minister had to refer to his notes, scripted to the nth degree, clearly without any great feeling, meaning or passion for the job that was ahead. And now we see that lack of any real political thought with the daily veering off left and right with speeches and statements that he makes. Terrified of what reform is doing to the Labour vote, he tries to ape us in policy. The problem is, when he does, nobody actually believes him, given his own record.
This isn't nitpicking, it's a revealing psychological snapshot. Keir Starmer stood at the pinnacle of his political career, outside number 10, victorious, with the nation watching. And yet, in that defining moment, he looked down at his notes 158 times in just 9 minutes. That isn't the behaviour of a man speaking from conviction, it's the instinct of someone terrified to go off script. What we saw wasn't leadership. It was a performance cautious, calculated and hollow. Starmer appeared not as a Prime Minister inspired by purpose, but as a manager of appearances. A man governed by polling data, not principles. Every gesture, every word, carefully measured to avoid offence rather than ignite belief. And here lies the deeper problem. Each time Starmer tries to mimic the language of reform or borrow the tone of conviction politics, it falls flat. The public doesn't buy it because his record tells a different story. He has reversed course on nearly every major issue: Brexit, policing, gender policy, even economic direction. Nigel Farage summed it up bluntly. Starmer isn't veering left or right. He's floating aimlessly, a leader without a compass, steering a government without a destination.
But if the Prime Minister believes in anything, then he believes in this concept of international law. He cares about how he's viewed on the world stage, and we've seen that in his actions over the course of the last couple of weeks. This Prime Minister has no connection with working people, no connection with what we used to call working class communities. He doesn't understand what it's like to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go out and work physically hard for the day. He doesn't seem to understand that the tax burden, the cost of living, energy bills have meant that people genuinely have had a lower standard of living quite consistently over the course of the last 10 years. He has absolutely no conception, as part of the North London set, of the genuine damage to community that has been done by mass immigration over the course of the last 25 years. And it was interesting that in his 5 key priorities for government, immigration, whether legal or illegal, wasn't even mentioned. And if he thinks that having a net migration figure of 431,000 in his first year in office is some kind of victory, well, I'd remind him that is a city the size of Bristol. And the fact that he's made one speech that someone wrote for him to try and counter this won't change a thing. The idea that it will smash the gangs is already reduced to a farce, as over 800 young men came into our country last week. I've done my best to urge him to declare this an emergency situation. He refuses to do so. And I find it odd that 3 terrorists, 3 men who were going to blow up the Israeli embassy, who entered this country by small boats and were picked up by the authorities a couple of weeks ago. I find it extraordinary there isn't a greater debate about the threat to our national security that is being posed in the English Channel. But if Starmer doesn't get it, and if the Conservatives don't get it, and if much of mainstream media don't get it, let me tell you something, the country does. Out there, the country does. They can see that what is happening is unfair, they can see that it's wrong, but they can also see that it is also damn dangerous.